So the timeline of the life of Jesus, it's relatively simple. And we can see it here on page 176. 3 phases in Jesus' life. We have his, what we call the pre-public ministry, his infancy narratives, the story of Jesus in the temple as a 12-year-old boy. And we have that listed for you here on page 176. This is Jesus' obscurity, where he's just growing up in northern Israel in a place called Galilee in the town called Nazareth. It's a backwater, tiny village. That's what we're talking about. So Jesus is growing up in the middle of nowhere, in a nowhere town, in a nowhere place, in a relatively unimportant part of a giant empire called the Roman Empire. That's where the divine Son of Man chose to be born and spend his upbringing in this backwater place called Israel. And he grows up in this backwater place called Nazareth. And we see the pre-public ministry of Jesus. But then Jesus will announce himself as the rightful king. And the turning point, as the Gospel of Luke presents it, is this. Jesus will go out into the wilderness to be tempted. Remember, there's always a movement east when the people of Israel are in rebellion and sin. We need someone who can go out into the wilderness, out into the exile, and defeat the power of sin there. So that's the narrative of Jesus' temptation. He's baptized in the Jordan, and he goes immediately, we're told, out east. He enters into the exile of his people Israel, and he squares off directly with the Satan, this accuser figure, and they do battle. And the question is, every other person, every other human has fallen victim to that power. It's what we keep drawing. This power of sin keeps enslaving. We need someone who will win. And Jesus goes into the wilderness and he defeats the Satan. He defeats this power called sin and evil. He stares it down at his weakest and is victorious. And what the gospel writer Luke tells us, he comes back into Nazareth. He goes and he opens the scroll of Isaiah. He reads the story of Yahweh coming to rescue Israel from the exile and says, today this is happening. Now, think of what we've drawn so far. We have the picture of the Messiah. Jesus is the answer to Israel's problem, this Russian doll, this nesting doll. We're looking for that one. And think of our second picture with the power of sin keep going out and out and out. We need someone who can defeat it. And Jesus is presented from the very beginning of his gospel, of these gospel accounts. He's the one who defeats the power of sin and death. He is Yahweh coming to visit his people. And when Yahweh comes, he defeats their enemies and he brings forgiveness. So Jesus, from the very beginning, is defined by all of this panorama timeline that we're looking at. That will create for him rising popularity through his miracles, his teaching, which will lead to increasing opposition. Here's why. The Pharisees and Sadducees, the leadership of Israel, what they are looking for is Yahweh coming to vindicate them and defeat the powers of Rome. That's what the Pharisees are after. The Pharisees believe that if they will be obedient to the Torah, they're not the legalistic police, okay? We have a bad rap for the Pharisees. What the Pharisees are thinking is, if we will be wholeheartedly focused on obedience to Torah, remember Deuteronomy, then God will remove the exile. Yahweh will come and visit us and he'll kill the Romans. He'll move the Romans out of here and we'll have our kingdom and our nation back. And Jesus shows up and says, I am defeating the enemy, but it's not the enemy called Rome. It's the enemy called sin. And the Jewish leadership just flat out misunderstands it. They hear Jesus and go, we don't want that kind of victory. We want Rome out of here. And that's the battle that they're going to square off constantly over. Jesus is redefining the nature of God's kingdom around himself. And the Jewish leadership says, not a chance. The Torah says it this way. We've been expecting this way. We're not going to listen to you. And that will lead to increasing opposition. We also might note, the Pharisees have also built an entire tradition around their ability to keep the Torah. And it's led to, we might say, a great deal of judgmentalism and shame and hypocrisy. And Jesus will lash out at that hypocrisy. He'll say that you, in your zeal to obey Torah, you've actually missed the greater part of the Torah, which is about justice, which is about care for people. It's about bringing God's blessing out into the world, and you've missed it. And that's the increasing opposition. Now, on page 177, let this be for you a month of a quiet time. This is one of my favorite parts of the Panorama timeline. If you were discipling people, lean in. If you're discipling people, take this, put it on a note on your phone or write it down somewhere, take a picture, send it to your disciples, and take a month together and read these 25 key events of the life of Christ. It's printed for you right here. Just take page 177 and 178 and 179. Take those 3 pages and make that 25 days of a quiet time. If you want to have 1 day off a week, then do it in a month and take 1 day off each week. So you have 31 days to do 25 key events. People that were discipled, let's get them acquainted with the story of Jesus. Do this yearly. You might make this a yearly practice for you or for your family. Do this with your kids at home. Take these events of Jesus' life and read them, and it kind of will chronologically walk you through the narrative of Jesus. And you can see it printed for you right here. So this is the life of Jesus, his pre-public ministry, then his rising popularity, especially in the Galilean ministry at the top of page 178. His broader Galilean ministry, which we'll see many people in the crowds come to him. And then his presentation to Israel in leading to their rejection of him and the death and resurrection of Jesus. And so this is a really helpful several week quiet time experience. It's something you can do with your disciples. You can do it in your small group, and I encourage you to take advantage of that right here. And now we'll turn and look at a theological question, which is, what is Jesus doing presenting himself as the Messiah or the King? We got to get our arms around it. So let's turn now to page 179 and the mission of Jesus as the Messiah King.